Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Hey y'all, welcome back. My name is Tamika Collins, and this here is my YouTube page. We are reading the Bible from Genesis to Revelation on these particular sessions here, these videos. And we are in Leviticus. We are in the 12th chapter now. We read the 11th chapter. And we recap. It's a small recap for once. Well, maybe twice. I've had maybe two of these small ones. But in chapter 11, it talks about what animals were considered clean and unclean at that time, okay? So, let's get into chapter 12, shall we? I hope you're having a great morning, afternoon, evening, night. Okay, so chapter 12 is the purification after childbirth. Excuse me, I'm tugging on my clothes, y'all. It's getting chilly outside. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during the menstrual period. On the 8th day, the boy's foreskin must be circumcised. After waiting 33 days, she will be purified, not touching anything but that is set apart as holy." Oh, no. I'm sorry. She will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. During this time of purification, she is not to touch anything that is set apart as holy, and she must not enter the sanctuary until her time of purification is over. If a woman gives birth to a daughter, she will be ceremonially unclean for 2 weeks, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. After waiting 66 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. When the time of purification is complete for either a son or a daughter, the woman must bring a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or turtle dove for purification offering. She must bring her offerings to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will then present them to the Lord to purify her. Then she will be ceremonially clean again after bleeding at childbirth. These are the instructions for a woman after childbirth of a son or a daughter. If a woman cannot afford to bring a lamb, she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One will be for the burnt offering and the other for the purification offering. The priest will sacrifice them to purify her, and she will be ceremonially clean. That is chapter 12. Thank you, Jesus. We don't have to do all of this. It's a blessing to be able to even go into the Lord's house and or to do things after you have had any of these restrictions. I'll say restrictions that they had prior to Jesus coming to this earth. you know it's a blessing to be able to live freely, and that's what Jesus came to do. He came to give us life and life more abundantly, and we take that for granted. Definitely, I have taken it for granted. Still do sometimes take it for granted. Just how blessed we are, you know. And I thank you. I surely do. Chapter 13 of Leviticus says serious skin diseases. Talking about serious skin diseases. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, if anyone has a swelling or a rash or discolored skin that might develop into a serious skin disease, that person must be brought to Aaron and the priest, or to one of his sons, the priest, and will examine the affected area of the skin. If the hair in the affected area has turned white and the problem appears to be more than skin deep, it is a serious skin disease, and the priest who examines it must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. But if the affected area of the skin is only a white discoloration and does not appear to be more than skin deep, and if the hair on the spot has not turned white, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest will make another examination. If he finds the affected area has not changed and the problem has not spread on the skin, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 more days. On the seventh day, the priest will make another examination. If he finds the affected area has faded and has not spread, the priest will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. It was only a rash. The person's clothing must be washed, and the person will ceremonially be clean. But if the rash continues to spread after the person has been examined by the priest and has been pronounced clean, the infected person must return to be examined again. If the priest finds that the rash has spread, he must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean, for it is indeed a skin disease. Anyone who develops a serious skin disease must go to the priest for an examination. If the priest finds a white swelling on the skin and some hair on the spot has turned white, then there is an open sore, and there is an open sore in the affected area. It is a chronic skin disease, and the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. In such cases, the person needs not to be quarantined, for it is obvious that the skin is defiled by the disease. Now, suppose the disease has spread all over the person's skin, covering the body from head to foot. When the priest examines the infected person and finds that the disease covers the entire body, he will pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. He will pronounce, if it covers the entire body, I just want to make sure I read that right. If it covers the entire body, he will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. Since the skin has turned completely white, the person is clean. But if any open sores appear, the infected person will be pronounced ceremonially unclean. The priest must make this pronouncement as soon as he sees an open sore, since open sores indicate the presence of skin disease. However, if the open sores heal and turn white like the rest of the skin, the person must be returned to the priest for another examination. If the affected areas have indeed turned white, the priest will then pronounce the person ceremonially clean by declaring you are clean. If anyone has a boil on their skin that has started to heal, but a white swelling or reddish white spot develops in its place, the person must go to the priest to be examined. If the priest examines it and finds it to be more than skin deep, and if the hair in the affected area has turned white, the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. The boil has become a serious skin disease, but if the priest finds no white hair on the affected on the affected area in the skin, and the problem appears to be more than skin deep and has faded, the priest must quarantine the person 7 days. If that time the affected area spreads on the skin, the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean because it is a serious disease. But if the area grows no larger and does not spread, it is merely the scar from the boil, and the priest will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. If anyone has suffered a burn on the skin and the burn area changes color, becoming either reddish white or shiny white, the priest must examine it. If he finds that the hair in the affected area has turned white and the problem appears to be more than skin deep, a skin disease has broken out in the burn. On the burn, the priest must then pronounce the person ceremonially unclean, for it is clearly a skin disease. But if the priest finds no white hair on the affected area and the problem appears to be no more than skin deep and has faded, the priest must quarantine the infected person for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest must examine the person again. If the affected area has spread on the skin, the priest must pronounce that the person is ceremonially unclean, for it is clearly a skin disease. But if the affected area has not changed, or spread on the skin and has faded, it is simply a swelling from the burn. The priest will then pronounce the person ceremonially clean, for it is only the scar from the burn. If anyone, either a man or a woman, has a sore on the head or chin, the priest must examine it. If he finds it is more than skin deep, has a fine yellow hair on it, the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. It is a scabby sore of the head or chin. If the priest examines the scabby sore and finds that it is only skin deep, but there is no black hair on it, he must quarantine the person for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest must examine the sore again. If he finds that the scabby sore has not spread and there is no yellow hair on it, and it appears to be only a skin deep, the person must shave off all hair except the hair on the affected area. The priest must quarantine a person for another 7 days. On the seventh day, he will examine the sore. If it has not spread and appears to be more than skin deep, the priest will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. The person's clothing must be washed and the person will be ceremonially clean. But if the scabby sore begins to spread after the person is pronounced clean, the priest must do another examination. If he finds that the sore has spread, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. The infected person is ceremonially unclean. But if the color of the scabby sore does not change and the black hair has grown on it, it has healed, the priest will then pronounce the person ceremonially clean. If anyone, either a man or a woman, has shiny white patches on their skin, the priest must examine the affected area. If he finds that the skin patches are only pale white, this is a harmless skin rash and the person is ceremonially clean. If a person loses his hair on his head and becomes bald, he is still ceremonially clean. And if he loses his hair on his forehead, he simply has a bald forehead. He is still clean. However, if a reddish sore appears on the bald area on the top of his head or his forehead, then this is a skin disease. The priest must examine him, and if he finds swelling around the reddish white sore anywhere on the man's head and it looks like a skin disease, the man is indeed infected with the skin disease and is unclean. The priest must pronounce him ceremonially unclean because of sore on his head. Those who suffer from the serious skin disease must tear their clothing and leave their hair uncombed. They must cover their mouth and call out, "Unclean, unclean," as long as the serious disease lasts. They will be ceremonially unclean. This must live in They must live in isolation in their place outside the camp. Now, suppose mildew contaminates some woolen or linen clothing, woolen or linen fabric, the hide of an animal, or anything made of leather. If the contaminated area in the clothing, the animal hide, the fabric, or the leather article has turned greenish or reddish, it is contaminated with mildew and must be shown to the priest. After examining the affected spot, the priest will put the article in quarantine for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest must inspect it. If the contaminated area has spread, the clothing or fabric or leather is clearly contaminated by serious mildew and is ceremonially unclean. The priest must burn the item, the clothing, the woolen or linen fabric or piece of leather, for it has been contaminated by serious mildew. It must be completely destroyed by fire. But if the priest examines it and finds that the contaminated area has not spread in the clothing, the fabric, or the leather, the priest will order the object to be washed and then quarantined for 7 more days. Then the priest will examine the object again. If he finds that the contaminated area has not changed color after being washed, even if it did not spread, the spot is on. Hold on. Even if it has not spread, the object is defiled. It must be completely burned, whether the contamination spot is on the inside or outside. But if the priest examines it and finds that the contaminated area has faded after being washed, he must cut the spot out of the clothing, the fabric, or the leather article. The mildew is clearly spreading and the contaminated object must be burned up. But if the spot disappears from the clothing, the fabric, or the leather article after it has been washed, it must be washed again. Then it will be ceremonially clean. These are the instructions for dealing with mildew that contaminates woolen or linen clothing or fabric, anything made of leather, or anything made of leather. This is how the priest will determine whether these items are ceremonially clean or unclean. The priest had a whole lot to do. He had to be the pastor, the doctor. He had to do a lot. And, more so, too, the fact that they are just getting out of the land of Egypt still and are coming into being their own persons, living a particular life that is not up under the Egyptian ruling, up under Pharaoh's orders or, his demands and things, where he probably was very, mean and cutthroat and just killed whomever came with a spot or wrinkle or whatever the case may be. So, they still are, establishing their rules and regulations for the living among the Lord now, and not pagan gods. And like I said, a overseer like Pharaoh was pretty much to them, was an overseer. So that is chapter 12 and 13. I hope you have a great day. Excuse me. I hope you have a great day, a great evening, a great morning, a great night, whenever, however you're watching this, whenever. Have a great one. Okay. I will see you next time.